Well, it's finally happened. We've all managed to reach the end of 2020. Looking back, what were some of the best and the worst moments from a pro-family, pro-life perspective? Welcome to Speak Up Virginia, equipping you to speak up on the life, family, and freedom issues that matter most to you. From the Family Foundation, I'm your host, Candy Cushman, and I'm joined today by our president, Victoria Cobb. Okay, Victoria, I know you would never say this yourself, but the fun part is that as an employee at the Family Foundation, I can say it, and that is that you really are one of the most foremost experts on all the behind-the-scenes stuff, the ins and outs of how things really work in Virginia politics. I mean, you've been at the front lines for pro-family, pro-life causes for more than 25 years. You've pretty much seen it all, so I just have to ask you, what are some of the most amazing, amusing stories you can share with us of what goes on behind the scenes?
Well, amazing and amusing are definitely different. I've got some of both. But, the thing is, people think about down there lobbying, being an advocate for family issues, and they think about you must have these great arguments, and that's all true. But the thing they forget is it's mostly about relationships first, because you can have the greatest information in the world, but if you haven't built the relationships with legislators, it's not going to matter. So the funny parts are when you try to do that, especially when you're young and new. I remember when I was just starting out at the Family Foundation, trying to build these relationships with these legislators. We finally got this really senior legislator, I'll leave his name out of it, but we finally got him to come to our dinner. They sat him next to me at the dinner, and I thought, I'm gonna have all this time to really build this relationship with him. But I had to go up and give an award, and I'm 22 years old, don't give public speeches often. I go up there, I give out this award, I sit down, and I go to grab a glass of water, and I'm still shaking, and I literally throw a glass of water on this senator's lap. I will just assure you that relationship wasn't that great before, but definitely wasn't that great afterwards.
Yeah, I think I heard a rumor he didn't vote with us after that. Right?
No, not so much, not so much. But it is a lot about how you develop those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Well, I was actually here to witness an interesting moment at the Capitol when I arrived at the Family Foundation last year, and that was the day you were labeled the, quote, worst person in Virginia. Can you tell us a little bit about that moment?
Oh, that's a funny story. These committee rooms get packed. So you're trying to grab a seat, your team's trying to grab a seat. So I sat down, there's an individual sitting next to me, and then one over from that individual was one of my teammates. And sure enough, after the hearing, we get back, and this teammate tells me, by the way, I saw the person next to you text to her friend or whoever that she was sitting next to the worst person in Virginia. And so we just enjoy these moments. We do have to laugh about them.
Yeah, there's a little bit of dark humor on the staff sometimes to get through the onslaught, because the next day everyone mysteriously had these business cards on their desk with your name on it, and worst person in the world, one of our staff did that.
I mean, very few people get a business card with something like that on it. So it's always in good humor, and you just realize people have different views and different opinions about you.
Heading into our year-end review, there is so much we could cover. After all, 2020 was the year of the pandemic, heartbreaking racial unrest, street protest, a historic Supreme Court nomination, and the list goes on. I think this is one of those years that will be a significant marker in all of our lives. But the review we really want to bring to the table today is, number one, Virginia-focused, and number two, from the perspective of the issues we work on every day at the Family Foundation, which is really life, family, and religious freedom if we were going to boil it all down. So Victoria, let's start on a positive note here. What do you think were some of our biggest praises in those areas this year?
Well, one, which might get overlooked but is really significant, is that we expected our school choice program to be attacked the very first year that the face of the General Assembly changed. And in fact, they decided to not move that bill last year. And so that's 4,500 children who are sitting with scholarships as a result of a tax credit. It's a big deal, and it means a lot to families. So just not having to fight that battle is a big deal.
Really quick, tell us a little bit about this school choice scholarship program and why it matters so much to these kids, especially those who were struggling in their previous school and they depend on this scholarship to be in a place where they can thrive.
Well, people choose a school other than their public school for a lot of reasons, but these kids need these scholarships because they're not of the income where they can make that choice without them. So this is a situation where a family is not going to be able to line up with their values or line up with the educational needs of that student unless they have this scholarship to go somewhere other than their local school.
Yeah, that is so important that we protect those options, especially for the kids who need it most. Do you expect to have to defend this again?
I don't think there's any question that there is still folks who believe that public school should be the only answer for a lot of people, and so they will go after this scholarship, whether it's this year or a future year.
Yes. Well, we praise God that that was protected for at least 4,500 students. You know, another really poignant moment was when pastors came up to the Capitol in 2020, and they really ended up changing a vote on a core issue impacting Christian adoption agencies.
Yeah, under attack at that moment was actually the conscience clause we've put into the law to say that adoption agencies have to be able to adopt according to their faith, meaning that a Catholic adoption agency, for example, should not have to put a child into a home that does not have a mom and a dad. And that was under attack, and we saw pastors show up in droves, and in particular, Pastor Platt out of McLean Bible Church, one of the biggest churches in Virginia, came, and he was only there because his own adoption actually was stayed off because he was supposed to be in China. And we all know COVID and all the things that went wrong this year, but he was there by God's provision, and it mattered because Northern Virginia legislators listened to him because he has so many people that he influences.
Yes, you can definitely see God's providence in that. So again, another praise moment. Well, let's just cover one more significant win from 2020, and that was not actually in the legislature, but it was in the courts.
Well, this year we ended up forming a new law center because we knew it was going to be needed. But boy, we had a case before we had even gotten out the door. And that is that when COVID hit, the governor said, well, abortion's an essential service. Planned Parenthood and all those places have to stay open. But we had a woman whose pro-life ministry came under attack because she continued to try to serve with her mobile ultrasound outside of an abortion center during COVID. And she actually had Virginia Beach City come after her and cite her with a criminal citation for daring to offer women an alternative.
Well, wasn't Planned Parenthood, didn't they make a call for the police to come out or something?
Well, there's no question that was the pandemic gave them an easy excuse to shut down. But here's the funny part. Up until July 1, which has happened in June, up until July 1, you had to have an ultrasound to get an abortion in Virginia. So it was actually an essential service that she was offering also.
Well, how is that important for moving forward for other pro-life efforts in the state?
Well, we just know that there's always a battle between life and death when we're talking about abortion, between pro-life forces and Planned Parenthood. And so it's going to require that all of us step in and help these ministries. And if we have to do that with our law center, we'll do that.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're just now joining us for Speak Up Virginia, brought to you by the Family Foundation. For more information about us or the topics we're addressing, you can visit familyfoundation.org. That's familyfoundation.org. Sadly, the reality is in 2020, because of the liberal leadership that is taking over in Virginia, we had many more losses for life, family, and freedom than wins, right?
Well, this is a season. It's a hard season for Virginia, but it is a season. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and we just stay active, we stay faithful, and we hope to turn things around.
Well, on that note, let's take a deep dive and talk about some of the worst moments in 2020 from a pro-family perspective and how we can kind of start to build back from that.
Well, I'll mention one of what I thought was the most significant thing that happened in all of session that really went under the radar is there was a bill introduced that actually changed the definition of abuse. And it would have changed it to include mental and emotional harm done to a child who has gender confusion or has a sexual orientation issue. So essentially, if a parent simply was trying to guide their child back towards alignment with, for example, their mental thoughts about their gender with their body, that could be considered abuse.
That really is scary, and I know in one of our recent email alerts, we talked about a case in Australia that illustrates exactly where a law like that leads.
Yeah, that's a scary thing to watch, where in another country, the child was literally taken away from the parents because the parents didn't believe that she should actually be doing medical changes to her body to change her gender.
Yes, very invasive. It seems like it should be a matter of course that parents would be involved in something like that. But the good news is that we did defeat it thanks to pastors and parents who, as our show is called, were willing to speak up. So how can people stay in the know on this and speak up again, if it comes up again?
Well, the easiest way to do that is to be on our website at familyfoundation.org because you can sign up for our email alerts, which is a timely notification of an issue when it's in front of your legislator. And it includes a link so that you can directly communicate with your own legislator on the matter.
Well, of course, some of the most disturbing events of 2020 in our state were centered around the whole area of sexuality. Let's just start with the so-called Virginia Values Act. First of all, what kind of values are we talking about here?
Well, unfortunately, we're talking about the values of political correctness and silencing dissenting voices, essentially, Christian worldview under attack. But the bottom line is the Virginia Values Act was a law that, under the guise of non-discrimination, said that even churches and Christian schools can't make discernment choices when they go to hire a teacher, that if a teacher doesn't align with their view of biblical sexuality, they would still have to hire them.
Right. So this really is a pretty blatant attack on the basic religious freedoms of our churches, faith-based charities, and schools, because it's about practicing their faith.
Yeah, if you can't practice your faith in your own Christian organization, we have a whole different country than what was set up by our founders.
Yeah, and that's their whole purpose of being Christian, is to practice their faith.
That's right.
Well, again, there is some good news here. It turns out that there are some brave Christians willing to speak up on this. We already have several churches, schools, and a crisis pregnancy center that are challenging this in court. Can you tell us about that for a minute?
Well, we needed some brave churches and some brave organizations that were willing to fight back, because this cannot stand. It is not constitutional. It violates our religious freedom. So we're thrilled that they're part of it. We're thrilled as our Founding Freedoms Law Center gets to be a part of the case as well. It's important that we all do what we can to challenge these laws.
Absolutely, because while we are challenging things physically, we also have to remember that we're doing it spiritually, and just to not give up in that and persevere. Well, it's time for our Inconceivable Moments Award, where we're featuring examples of the absolute lunacy and craziness that happens when cultural leaders try to give guidance completely apart from biblical principles. And we're calling this the Liberals' Most Inconceivable Moments Award.
Inconceivable!
Victoria, who has the honor of being this week's nominee?
This week, it's got to go to our very own Governor Northam, who made a strange statement during a press conference the other day that appeared to be a pretty sweeping stereotype of churchgoers. Basically, it seemed like he was accusing worshipers of spreading the virus in grocery stores. Let's just listen to this in his own words.
But there are some, and I've heard reports, just like everybody else has, that they don't use distancing inside the church. They're not wearing masks. And quite frankly, we know that a lot of the spread is coming from this, because these individuals that are in a place of worship and contract the virus then go out to their place of work or to the grocery store or the convenience store or wherever. And that's how this is spread. And
well, to be fair, the governor did mention that there were many churches doing the right thing, but still, this comment, talking about a certain group of people spreading disease or a virus, was a pretty broad assumption that any churches not following all his orders to the T were basically spreading COVID. Victoria, talk to us about why that assumption is dangerous in the long run.
Well, you would think, given that people that come from the left make such a big deal about stereotyping and discrimination, you would think you would never hear something like this out of a governor's mouth, that he would take a group of people and wrap them up because they're by faith. They'd say, oh, they're the ones spreading the disease. And honestly, as believers, we look back at history and we think, how dangerous is this, that you would accuse people of faith of spreading disease? We think of the ghettos. We look at the comment. This similar concept came from Governor Cuomo in New York, blaming the Jews, their Jewish people, as they were meeting in a synagogue for spreading disease.
Right, and we just want to make very clear that we all agree COVID is serious and a real concern that needs to be addressed, but that can be done without these broad stereotypes and discrimination against religious groups. So Victoria, where do you think the line is here? How can we defend our religious freedoms in this area with, safeguarding people with COVID, but churches feeling the freedom to speak out about what their rights are?
Well, churches need to feel like they should be able to operate like any other organization, and they should not come under additional scrutiny simply because they're people of faith. So if the grocery stores are open and people are walking around and sports teams are still happening, which they are, and then the churches should feel comfortable to be able to practice, appropriate distancing and masks and function as they can.
All right, now's a great time to wrap up and just remind everyone, after we've done a few of these Inconceivable Awards, we're going to put them in a top 50 list that you can download. So if you want to participate in the process, be sure to send in your nominations to speakupradio@familyfoundation.org. Thanks for joining us for this week's Speak Up Virginia, brought to you by the Family Foundation. Visit us at familyfoundation.org. That's familyfoundation.org. See you next time. And don't forget, we are stronger when we speak together.